you can have an expectation of where it's going to go, but really what you're doing is you're sort of looking at the thing that is going to grow as its own living being. Part of my job is just to try to create the right conditions for this group of people to stumble on a great thing.
Welcome, friends. I'm Kristen Marting, and this is Torches. Today we have John Collins. John is an award-winning director and founder and artistic director of Elevator Repair Service, one of the most acclaimed experimental theater companies in New York City. I'm really excited to speak with him today. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
So, how'd you come to be in downtown performance?
How did I come to be in downtown performance? Well, let's see. In a sort of practical way, I have to give David Herskovits an awful lot of credit as someone who taught me a class in college. He taught a seminar at Yale when I was there my senior year, and after that invited me to come work on a show that he was doing at NADA in September of 1991, and I had just graduated. So it was really thanks to David that I had any way of landing in New York with any kind of theater connection when I got here. And it was Titus Andronicus, a huge cast. Cast alone, I think, was like 20 or 21 people. And so it was a great introduction to a whole scene, a whole community, because David was already so dialed in and knew all these great actors and was doing something very exciting. And for me at the time, I knew of downtown before then, and I think I didn't understand it. I didn't know where I might fit into it in any way. David brought me in as a sound designer, and it was my first job as a sound designer, something I went on to do with a lot of other downtown groups.
With Foreman, with Wooster
Richard Foreman and Richard Foreman and the Wooster Group, and all of that is also really due to David, because David was Richard Foreman's assistant and stage manager at the time. So that was the door that opened for me. David did that. And he, of course, was an amazing mentor and teacher and, someone I really looked up to a lot and still do. But I had an idea. I remember I had an idea in my head that I did want to go to New York, and I wanted to direct things and make things. But I was sort of terrified, and late in my college career, I was thinking like, I'm not going to New York City unless I've got a job waiting for me. I am terrified of that place. I'd lived a summer here in the city, and I had done a semester of school in the city, but still coming here as a professional, as an adult was pretty intimidating. And David gave me sort of threw me a lifeline. And I was like, okay, that's good enough. I think maybe I got paid $300 for the show, but I was like, job, I can come. I have met my condition. So that was how I got involved. And, it was an incredible springboard too, just because I NADA at the time was a place of incredible artistic density. There were so many things. And of course there were other places like the Ohio and what you guys were doing at the American Living Room that were also, that brought so many people together, and where so much was happening, packed so close together. I was immediately introduced to all kinds of cross-pollination, different companies and people. And so it was a fantastic introduction.
How did your aesthetic, experimentation, risk is really core to the way that you make your work? How did that come to be at your center?
I had some strong ideas then that were mostly kind of contrarian ideas. I had on the one hand an idea about the kinds of things that I wanted to do, and in innocent and youthful sort of way, they were like, I don't want to make regular theater. I don't want to do, I don't want to do it the way you're supposed to do it. And part of that came from a very real place of, I had worked on some shows as an actor in college. I mean, it's not much experience to speak of, but it was enough for me to recognize that there was something I really loved about making a piece of theater, making a play, and what happened when you were rehearsing something, what happened when you were trying to do a thing and not always, not always hitting the mark.
Yeah.
And in some ways that was really exciting to me. There were things that happened by accident all the time, when you're trying to make, when you're trying to achieve what the script tells you to do. And I was like, gosh, I would really like to make things that didn't, that could go off on a tangent and make a piece based on that. And I found that, what I took to be conventional theater at the time didn't really allow for that. And I said, I want to do that. So there was a kind of impulse to do things that were, and I had gotten excited about the Dadaists when I was in college, and, people who were, and I think I can trace all of this back to an experience of seeing the Wooster Group when I was 18. And that connects to the other sort of ideal that I carried with me, which was something about making things as an ensemble. I saw the Wooster Group when I was, my first part of my college career, I was at Duke University, and Duke had a program in New York City where they took a group of kids to all kinds of exciting performance things and art, and we saw the Wooster Group, and I absolutely did not understand what I had just seen. Like, it was complicated, it was layered, it was The Temptation of St. Anthony.
Yeah, it was a great piece.
Yeah, it was in 1988, and it was so complicated, and I just couldn't figure out how I was supposed to watch it, what I was supposed to be seeing, what was expected of me as an audience member. And as part of that program, people would come speak to our group, and Paul Berman, who was the administrator of the Wooster Group at the time, came and spoke to us and said, basically told me I didn't have to worry about those expectations. He said, just look at it the way you would look at visual art. And I had just enough understanding of art, visual art at the time, to know that, you didn't have to see a narrative. There wasn't a single interpretation. And that was so liberating to hear about theater, that I could see a piece of theater. And then I went back to see it, and all of a sudden it was my favorite thing I had ever experienced. It was complicated, it was funny. It could be mysterious. The meaning could be hidden, but still there somewhere. That all just felt very real and truthful and exciting to me. So that, my mind having been sufficiently blown by that Wooster Group experience, and I kind of wanted to do that. And then I read about how they did it. And it was all about collaborating and sort of figuring the thing out as you went, and that all was just very, very appealing to me for whatever reason. So those were the kind of things that I wanted to do. So I liked the idea of making things that were messy and mysterious, and I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you also have said, you once said, we should try to make ourselves do something we thought we would never do.
Yeah.
Is that true today as you approach work?
Yeah. I mean, I think what I ultimately figured out was the thing that maybe mattered. I don't know. I started to say mattered the most. I don't know what matters the most, but a thing that became very important was looking for some ways to create friction in the process. Having putting two things together that didn't belong together. Doing, staging thing X against the background of thing Y, and these things just don't belong together at all. And that became important, partly because it seemed to get the best creative response out of the ensemble, out of me. And so, at some point, I would say our early days, a show we did here, it was our first one there, was language instruction. Love Family versus Andy Kaufman.
Kaufman,
Yeah,
yes.
it was our Andy Kaufman bio piece. And we had thrown these things together for that show. This idea of like bad language instruction records that we had. They were actually records that James Hanahan had. And something about Andy Kaufman, which is something that Steve Bodo brought to the process. And shoving these things together that maybe didn't belong and finding out how they spoke to each other was such a joyful process, you know. Trying to resolve the conflicts between the material we were forcing together was like where real creative work happened.
Yeah.
But having done that show, we thought, you know, oh, that worked. You know, we were so happy with that, you know.
Right.
And so we got, okay, so now we got to do that again, you know, and that turned out to be very difficult. And I think what we were realizing was that we needed to be in a place where we didn't really know what was going to happen. And one way to do that was to try to shake ourselves free at the time of our own expectations of ourselves.
Yes.
And so it out of a moment of kind of collective frustration, we said, well, let's just try to make something that we think does not conform to our idea of ourselves as an ensemble. So that was kind of where the show Cab Legs came from, which was a show we did at PS 122. We said, all right, what do we hate? Let's do all the things we hate. You know, we're going to make a love story. We'll do a play, a regular play, you know, these kind of things. And of course, forcing ourselves to do these things that we thought of ourselves as rejecting made us do something that was new.
Right.
And it also made for a more honest expression of our own creative impulses. You know, we weren't trying to imitate ourselves. Mm-hmm. We weren't trying to imitate a show we had done before that we were really delighted with. We sort of forced ourselves into a place where we would have to make new discoveries. So we still try to do that. Mm-hmm. You know, after 34 years, it's sometimes even doing that can be challenging. You know, let's do the thing we'd never do. Well, we've already done that. You know, the thing
we've never done.
What's another thing we would never do? Like, who are we? Like, what is it that we believe in so that we can contradict that? You know, it gets very complicated after a while.
Right.
I mean, the biggest lesson ultimately was that, you know, we still, after 3 decades, have to sort of face down the void, you know, and be willing to try something where we really don't know what the outcome's going to be, you know.
How's it changed that process, not having the same collaborators? In the early years, it was a lot of the same people, and some of them come in and go out still in the ensemble. So how has that changed your creating process?
Yeah, I mean, I think another misconception that I had early on, you know, including like we needed to make shows by a successful experimental theater formula, you know, that wasn't going to work. I also thought we would sort of form a rock band of sorts, and you'd see the same people up there, partly because that's what I thought the Wooster Group was, and that was a misconception. I mean, I saw several of their shows in a row and kept seeing the same people over and over again, and I knew that they had this core group they listed on their programs, like, this is the Wooster Group, and I wanted to be like them. And so, but even as early as the, you know, 3rd or 4th show, the ensemble was morphing, you know, it was evolving.
Right.
And
it was like Leo Marks at the beginning, and then Scott Shepard came in for Leo Marks when
Scott
he moved
literally
away.
replaced Leo within a show we did at the McGurk when we did that at Here. It was a big joke about Scott's first appearance. It's like his character was going to have to take the job that Leo's character had. People were always confusing them because they both had red hair, you know.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, there's always been a kind of evolution of the ensemble, and what I realized after a certain point was that the idea of working as an ensemble is very important, but it's not a matter of names on paper,
right?
You know. And I realized at a certain point that each time we would begin work on a show, it was very important to treat everyone involved as a long-term member of the ensemble, whether it was the first thing they had done, whether they had been working with us for, 10 years already, or this was their last thing. It didn't matter,
So everyone was on the same footing.
Yeah. I mean, everybody, in a practical way, people who've been around longer develop a shorthand with each other, and that does happen.
Right.
And, a certain amount of loyalty to those people and from those people is a very important part of the body of work that we've made. I think that I don't mean to dismiss it, but I think that, as an ensemble, as a theater company, we survive by always being willing to fall apart, to let people go.
Yeah.
Because as soon as somebody's there out of some obligation, not out of a real desire, or if somebody's not getting any joy out of doing it, then that's not where you want to be.
Yeah.
So I let the ensemble keep reforming itself, but as an ensemble,
right,
as it does.
Absolutely. So you also have had a process that is very slow, a long development process usually for your works.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about what you gain from creating work that way, but also now that you work inside larger institutions, how you get those institutions to respect that that's a need to create the work that you guys create.
There's a moment that I always think about in our history, which was a real learning experience. And it was when we started work, on what was going to become Highway to Tomorrow. Another show at Here. And you guys were so generous and understanding of what we needed in our process and said, okay, let's map out the development of this piece, which was an incredible privilege at the time. I think we had only learned the idea of developing work in several iterations because we'd been lucky enough to have that opportunity.
We had some shows that you guys did a workshop in American Living Room, and then it would be in the season later.
That's right. Yeah. Language instruction was that way. Right. Even our second show, which was Marx Brothers on Horseback Salad, started as it was our first American Living Room thing. And, we were making shows at the time, same with Mr. Antipyrine, our first show.
Which I got to see, and that's I was like, come do something with us. Right, your work's so cool.
That was great. I'm glad you reminded me. That's how we got to the American Living Room. Those shows were made as one-offs. It was like, one and done. What's the next thing?
Right.
And then because we got an opportunity to take another crack at them, I realized how important it was to, if you're making original work, you kind of have to make drafts of it,
Yes.
And you kind of have to let it live a little bit in front of an audience before you really understand what you're doing. Like there's a kind of honesty that's forced on your perspective when you're sitting among a bunch of strangers. I mean, they weren't strangers, and they were probably all our friends. But when you're with a group of people who's never seen the thing before, so that I learned early on how important that was. But that moment I was talking about was also instructive because, making plans for something to happen as it had happened by accident before is maybe a doomed enterprise. And sure enough, it was on that one. We started that process began with an American Living Room production of a little bit of The Great Gatsby. Mm-hmm. It was when we had first decided, and that was 1999. Wow. We had first decided that we were going to try to do something with that book. Mm-hmm. And we did an American Living Room, and we were making funny puppets and putting eyes on a coffee thermos and letting the coffee thermos play Nick Carraway, our production with Scott puppeting him. We had this puppet idea then. We put eyes on one of the columns.
Right.
At Here, and accidentally left them on for the next performance, which was a sort of embarrassing thing that happened. It was Basil Twist who noticed they were still up there and was like, I had to take them down. It was so powerful.
And so Elevator Repair Service, they were workshopping. Gatsby.
Yeah.
And so they were the first on the bill, I think, and they put two googly eyes on the column, which was genius, completely genius. And the column was a character immediately, and it was so brilliant. And they left the googly eyes on the column
By accident.
by accident. And then the next pieces came on. There was, I think, one more piece, and there was a column with googly eyes in the middle of the piece. And it just was such a potent reminder of how powerful the idea was of that column as a being. And, having googly eyes on it was completely comedic within someone else's piece. You could not ignore the column anymore. It was spectacular, but of course it was inappropriate for the piece. So I remember then at the end of that second piece, I ran up and I pulled those googly eyes off. For the third piece, as soon as we imbued that in the column, you could not make it go away. And even when you took the googly eyes off, it was
For
still
the rest of the night, it was still there.
Yeah, but that was...
It just had closed its eyes.
Yes, yeah.
But we did that, and then all of a sudden found out, oh no, we can't pursue that project anymore because we couldn't get the rights. So then the Fitzgerald estate, who denied us that opportunity, said, well, why don't you do this other book? And we did. So the next iteration of that show was a whole new idea.
Right.
With still some of the same puppets in it. And
yeah, we kept the eyes on the column.
Yep. And the thermos, I think, was
Yeah.
going to be, and there were some other things, little random objects that we had found and stuck eyes on. A shoe, a bowl, the column. And then the next iteration, we did the Last Tycoon, and just decided it was uninspired, and we didn't want to pursue that anymore. So then, I guess I don't remember exactly how we decided to do it, but we're like, okay, the next thing we're going to take a crack at the Bacchae.
Right.
So,
Yes.
So here we were, like our best laid plans of carefully developing iterations of this new show. It just kept starting over. So,
but with some elements that traveled all
yes,
along the way.
absolutely, with some elements
Right.
that traveled through. Like, so when we were doing the Bacchae, it starts off with a long dance that was made out of watching the movie of The Last Tycoon, using the puppets we had come up with for The Great Gatsby. So, the sort of
something you've never done before.
right.
Exactly.
And so the iterative nature of things, even that is sort of subject to whatever weather you end up facing.
Right.
And so over time, I finally realized that what that really means, well, two things. One, the deadlines are still very important, which is why, in making drafts of things, they always needed to have a performance involved.
Mm-hmm.
There needed to be a deadline, because eventually I learned that the best ideas take about 10 minutes to execute, and the not as good ideas, you spend months trying to make them work. So unfortunately, some of the long iterative process that we have engaged in all these years is about struggling to make bad ideas work. Some of it is about polishing and refining those good ideas that we nailed in 5 minutes. But, the other thing about all of this is that I finally understood after a while that making original work with an ensemble is much more akin to agriculture than it is architecture.
Explain.
Well, in architecture, you do a design, you plan it out on paper ahead of time, and then you execute it. Mm-hmm. You do the thing that you had planned on paper. Mm-hmm. Agriculture, at least in my metaphor, is more about creating the conditions for the right thing to happen.
And that thing may be different
But
every time.
It may be, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you can have an expectation of where it's going to go, but really what you're doing is you're looking at the thing that is going to grow as its own living being. I think of that as being as much a part of my job as anything else, is just to try to create the right conditions for this group of people to stumble on a great thing, and part of that is sometimes coming in with a plan, because you can't just be completely passive in that process. You have to do things, and sometimes what you have to do is say, all right, we're going to try to make XYZ happen. Let's do it. and then get ready for that plan to fall apart.
You hold both an administrative and artistic role with the company.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about how those things work together or don't work together?
Well, I think that my interest in having an administrative role comes from a sense of wanting the company itself to be a kind of organic whole, where, and, the creation of the work is about putting the resources together. It's about organizing the people. All of those things are completely entangled and inseparable in some ways. That it's an enterprise. It's a project more than just a series of shows. So I think there's something gratifying to me about being involved in all of those things. I mean, and also I think because in order to start making this kind of work, we had a kind of implicit choice in those early days. We could do it all ourselves, without any money, or with very little, or we could wait until the money was in place, and then try to do things in an orderly and responsible way. So we chose the former. And so, producing the work was ourselves was the only way to do it early on. So I think a lot of the associations that I have with, our whatever early successes we had, and by successes I mean just the things that gave us joy, the things that kind of kept us moving, came about because we were producing the work ourselves. We were doing it in our home, I mean, I look back on some of that now, and I realize that we were doing that with a certain amount of unconscious privilege. We all were comfortable enough to be willing to take those risks. And as I've gotten older, and I understand, looking back, how some of that was probably easier for me than it might have been for some other people.
Right.
But that was the seed of the whole thing, was doing everything ourselves. And so I've never quite let go of that. And so doing the administrative part of it and being involved and understanding that, it just, it gives me, also gives me a lot of gratification. So.
How does access to resources change the way you make things now?
It's a really interesting question, and one that I struggle with sometimes because, and there are all these intertwined trajectories implicated there. And by that I mean we are getting older. And so as older people doing this, I mean, I remember when Tori Vasquez came to work for me. She was one of the first full-time administrative employees the company had,
and also a performer in the
and
work.
And
yes.
she was, of course,
yes.
like she had come to us as a performer, and she was a performer then, but she came to work, sort of as a de facto managing director at the time. And I remember her coming in and saying, "I will do this job with you, but I have to have health insurance." And I remember thinking, like, all right. And she says, "And you are going to get it too." She says, "I'm not going to be the only one with it. You're going to get it too. I need this much money as a salary." And I mean, I don't mean to paint Tori as this hard-nosed negotiator, but
No,
she was about to start a family, and she had some very smart, practical ideas about what. And so that meant we needed resources to do that. So that's an early example of how just personal needs started to dictate, what sort of resources we would need to amass to do what we were going to do. So things started to change. I mean, that was 20 years ago, and that things started to change then. And you can't go back,
Right.
And we try to maintain, a sort of ethical relationship to the people who work with us.
Of course.
And so to do that and to take care of people, there need to be, resources. Which is money, really. It's not just money, but it's mostly money,
Yeah.
That kind of can come into conflict in some ways with the original ethos of the company, which is that, we just work with what we have. We don't need to lay out a big budget for this. We're just going to start work. And if there's some junk lying around the rehearsal space, that's what we're making the show out of. If the rehearsal space has some weird architecture where there's a bathroom back in the corner and a door and a window over here, that's gonna inform our scenic choices. So that still is a part of how we work. So there's a kind of assumption of a certain, poverty, for lack of a better word. Or a certain lack of resources, let's say. Poverty is too strong a word.
Right.
That I kind of need in order to, I don't want to have to make a budget and only make the thing that's going to be expensive, because
Right.
that's what's going to look right.
Right.
So it's become a balancing act since then, I think.
Yeah. So you're talking about commodification in the face of experimentation. So how do you think that institutions can do a better job of supporting experimentation despite being in this marketplace? It feels like it's in the conversation with the same thing you were just talking about.
We are in some ways an institution. We are, we are a 501c3 corporation. We have employees and all that stuff. But in other ways, we're not. We're thankfully shielded from a lot of what bigger institutions have to contend with, who are mostly about presenting the work of others.
Yeah.
And we work with a lot of those bigger institutions. I think we figured out a way to bring a lot to that relationship and be able to take advantage of what the bigger institutions bring. I guess, so it's hard for me to know what to say the institutions need. I feel like longer term thinking is something bigger institutions should always be checking themselves on, because I think, some of the examples of shorter term thinking that I think is ultimately hurtful to the survival of those institutions is thinking about what are our donors and audience going to like, right now, as opposed to what is the kind of work that's going to sustain us into the future, everybody has some part to play in this. I think that people will tend to come to bigger institutions with expectations of their resources, and demands on them. So the artists who come into contact with big institutions have a responsibility too. I think not to just expect them to be endlessly giving,
Right.
And the institutions themselves, I think, need to not always think so much about how pretty and slick everything's going to look. Can we get something to Broadway? But what's going to sustain an audience for years and years and years? And what's going to make you reliable? Not just what's going to make you successful this year.
Right.
But, I say that. It's easy for me to say that because we've been able to think that way. But we don't own a building.
Yeah.
We don't. We only have 5 full-time employees. We have we can be nimble in a certain way with the resources that we have that big institutions can't be sometimes. So I wish I had the perfect advice for the bigger institutions. I don't think I do.
How have institutions supported or not supported your work?
Well, going back to here in the 90s, in that example I gave about, institutions that can come to us and sort of recognize not just what we make, but how we make it, or the institutions that are able to recognize that the kind of longer term iterative process that we insist on, that the kind of collaborative nature of our work and the unpredictable nature of our work, the institutions that are able to recognize that and meet us halfway on that are the ones that have been the most helpful. And like I say, that goes back to here in the '90s. But in different ways, New York Theater Workshop and the public have also managed to find ways to support those ideals that we have. And that's more important to us than whatever kind of money they're able to offer us. I mean, I think it's support over time has been the most meaningful thing, really.
Yeah. I'm curious, just jumping back to GATS, how did you finally get permission years later?
I know, that was where it all began.
Right, yeah.
And there are still in the show that we are still performing now, however many years it's been since 1999. It's too much math for me. But there are still elements of that 45-minute thing we did for the American Living Room that are still in the show. The thermos makes a cameo. It's still there. It's a good example of how a company like this can evolve, because a few years later, in 2002 or 3, seemed like a long period of time, but it really was just a few years. We had gotten really frustrated again. We'd hit another point, kind of like that earlier time where we said we'll do what we would never do, where we're like, okay, we've done the thing we would do, we've done the thing we would never do, and it feels like there's nothing left to do. And we were having some real creative frustration, and we took a break. We just called a hiatus. I had been working with the Wooster Group as a sound designer, and I kind of went back to a little more of that. And the first thing that happened in that break was that I got very restless. I mean, it was a really good thing to do. It was a good example of why letting your theater company fall apart is a great way to keep it going.
Right.
Because I said, well, let's take a hiatus. We're out of ideas. Let's not force ourselves to do this thing if we're not inspired. And sure enough, that was all it took for me to get inspired.
Right.
And I ran into James Urbaniak at a bar in Dumbo, and he said to me, like, when are we going to do that Gatsby thing again? Because he had been our original Gatsby. And I was like, oh, well, maybe we should play with that idea some more, And I think I got Scott Shepard involved, and the three of us decided to just to have something to do, just to, knowing we didn't have the rights and that was going to be complicated. It didn't matter. We were just going to get together somewhere and tinker with the idea again. This time with the plan or the ambition, let's say, to do the entire book verbatim, feeling like that was an idea that would definitely fail, but the failure would produce something interesting. And so we met upstairs at the Performing Garage, where the Wooster Group is, and in the little upstairs outer office there, and started just playing around and said, okay, well, here's a little office. Let's imagine this is the set. What if this were the set? It was a great example of us just grabbing a found resource, this room we happened to be in. And we said, well, what if this is the set? And it all kind of flowed from there. Next thing you know, we were starting to develop a show about a guy in an office trying to hide his weird habit of reading The Great Gatsby out loud from his boss, who then suddenly becomes Gatsby. And that,
right.
So that was...
And then the estate relented eventually?
No. Eventually, yes. But it took some doing, and we eventually, had to do some secret performances of it.
I remember I came to some at the Performing Garage.
Yeah. In like the depths of winter, 2005. And I remember all people sitting in coats in the audience. But that was how that eventually came to life, was, in a sort of wonderfully organic way, without us having many expectations of it, except for the expectation that trying to do every word of a novel on stage would probably not work.
Right.
and that is a great example of how, your expectations are constantly being foiled. And if you let them be foiled, if you're open to what happens, there may be some success beyond that.
So your company is so focused around risk-taking and the work that you guys make. So how do you define success?
That's a tough one, really. I mean, they're obviously, you know, there are some easy examples. I think GATS is an easy example because I think we're very happy with it. Audiences have been happy with it. And it's done a lot for the company. You know, it kind of transformed us, let us become, you know, let us start touring a lot, let us have more money so that we could hire more people, so that we could do more. Other things, it's harder because, you know, when you're in a situation like we are, where we're trying to take risks, you know, we don't want to do anything that's going to be a guaranteed success. But we are also, you know, working with, depending on bigger institutions to be platforms for our work, and depending on audiences and press and it's this complicated formula of what elevates a show, you know. And sometimes we've done shows that I felt were very successful that didn't really get elevated, you know. They didn't. I mean, a good example, I think, is when we did a collaboration with Sybil Kempson. We did the show called Fondly Colette Richland.
Yeah, that was a great show.
Which we were all delighted with. I mean, it was difficult. It was really hard one to crank out, but
and that was the
worth it.
first time you guys worked with a living playwright as
Yes.
your collaborator.
Yes.
Key collaborator.
And you know, and we picked
And she met
Sybil.
you in your quirkiness.
That's right. Well, but Sybil is such a force,
Yeah.
and she's got an entire creative universe in her own head, and so it was like trying to merge galaxies, you know. But we were so happy with it, but half the audience walked out every single night.
Wow.
I would leave at intermission, and I would watch the show from a little booth that I climbed up a ladder to get into, and I would climb up the ladder without looking at the audience because I didn't want to see how many people had left.
Oh.
Because it got a nice review in the New York Times,
Yeah.
but it didn't really get extended. It never toured. You know, so a lot of the markers of success did not happen for that one.
Yeah.
And that was disappointing. And it's hard when, you know, you're making your work to be seen by an audience, and you fail to reach half the audience every night, you know.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Is that show a success? I feel like on some level, on some important level, it is. I wished and wish for it more of the trappings of the success that other shows have had, you know.
Right.
But there you go. I don't know.
So you were talking about audience. How has your audience changed as the company's recognition has grown and the ticket prices have gone up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, there was a moment there where, you know, we kind of graduated from off Broadway to off Broadway, and our reward was that our friends couldn't afford the shows anymore. The audiences were all a lot older and unfamiliar and sometimes hostile. like that was our prize for graduating to off Broadway. I mean, it did mean a little bit of a starting over. I wouldn't say starting over, but it was a new hill to climb. You know, the exposure that playing in those theaters, in being a part of a sort of different environment, and really an environment that was much more, you know, professional in a certain way. You know, there's what's wonderful about some of the off Broadway work that we had done was that it was scrappy. It was all of us just struggling to put our heads above the line of amateur. But with all the great things that come with that, like all the spirit that comes with that, the community that comes with that, you know. So there was a lot that we immediately missed about, you know, that ecosystem we had grown up in.
Do you think that downtown spirit still exists here in terms of experimentation and risk and scrappiness?
I wonder about that all the time. I really do. And sometimes the answer I get is like, well, I just don't pay enough attention. You know, I think that there is a lot going on, and it's diffused now in a way. You know, when we were doing this, as you well know, you know, between Worcester Street and, you know, Avenue A and 14th Street, like this was a sort of zone there where like you could just walk from theater to theater to theater to theater, you know. There was House of Candles and Surf Reality, there was Nada, there was Piano Store, there was, you know, before here even, you know, there was the Ohio, and then there was here, and there was the Performing Garage, and PS 122 was right there, you know, the great mothership of downtown, you know, from the 80s. In a certain geographical way, it was easier to know what was going on then, because everybody was working on top of each other. Then,
Right, there was a centrality and gathering. Yeah.
And that, my sense is that has changed a lot. I don't know if that's the reason I don't feel as dialed into that, or, you know, but, you know, and I do think, you know, we came along at a time when I think a place like PS 122 was just starting to do a little bit more. I don't want to mischaracterize their history, but it seemed like they were starting to do more ensemble-based theater things, and maybe not be as exclusively focused on, you know, solo performance art kind of things, which is
right.
You know, and so, but that's, you know, those monologists, those performers like Karen Finley, who were Eric Bogosian, you know, those people that really put PS 122 on the map, kind of defined a sort of scrappiness and independence that I think we adopted, and that we made work for us. And I, sometimes I wonder if there's as much of that. I see a lot of people come to New York and go, yes, I'm going to have an experimental theater ensemble. It's going to be slick and well-funded, and, you know, the marketing's going to be really sharp, and I don't know who I'm talking about really, but it's a sort of generalized impression that I sometimes get, like, oh, well, that's a little too bad. Like, there's a messiness that must exist somewhere. I don't know where it is now, though. You know.
Interesting. I feel like a lot of what was downtown has moved to other boroughs.
It has,
there's
yeah.
There's a ton of
Oh,
scrappy
sure.
DIY stuff happening, but it's not as easy for older folks like us to find,
no.
and it's not as easy to get to it and to travel from venue to venue in the same way that you could go to a bar and know that you'd see some other people that were working at other theaters.
It's true.
And
It's very spread out.
That gathering doesn't exist in the same way.
Yeah, I don't know how much that matters, and it's probably was something that was inevitable, you know, with what was going to happen to real estate in Manhattan, and what was going to happen with the internet connecting people in a way that, you know, geography used to be more of the connection, you know.
Yeah, and in the 90s, a lot of theaters opened, but subsequently a lot of those theaters have closed because of the real estate market.
Yeah, and I mean, it makes it that much more impressive that places like the Bushwick Star and Chocolate Factory and some of the others, I don't know, the Tank, are managing to keep it going and still embody some of that spirit. You know, I feel hopeful about places like that. There's, you know, the Coffee Street place.
Coffee Street Studios in
Coffee
Red
Street
Hook.
Studios,
Yeah.
is
And Drama
another-
Case and her partner's place. Yeah.
That is another one. But it's a little bit foreign to me, though, in just when I think about my own experience of, you know, how that was all something that was so geographically connected when we were doing it in the 90s.
How has your own practice as an art maker changed as you've aged?
As an artist, I have matured very slowly over time, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I think there were a lot of youthful impulses that I had when I was 21, you know, that I don't have anymore. That I think I have become a little bit more serious, maybe, or I think as I've gotten to a place with some of the work that we've done, that I realized that it could have impact by more serious engagement with text and literature. Those were things I did not identify with at all early on. I wanted to make things that were anti-text, you know.
Yes,
I wanted found text. I wanted improvised text. I didn't, you know, some of the things that I've just discovered some of it through doing GATS, was a kind of turning point, understanding that we could deal with text in a serious way, that good writing was a meaningful thing. That's become pretty important to my work now. It was not important at the beginning. There are other things around, emotionally and intellectually and physically maturing that are going to change. We don't do as many of the wild dances that we used to do as part of the work. We wanted something that was purely physical back then, a lot of it.
And that was a lot of downtown theater at that time.
Yeah.
We had we're doing a play, but then we're going to do these dances.
Yeah, we're going
to do some weird text, and then we're going to do these dances.
Yeah, we wanted lots, and I loved that back then. It was like a great sort of shortcut to making a theatrical experience.
And
Just
you'd have
get
a little
everybody moving.
breather. You'd have a little breather as an audience, and then you come back in.
Yeah. So I think that I don't feel as much of an impulse to do that. It's kind of hard to unpack, to tell you the truth, because I can recognize the things we do more of now and the things we do less of. I think somehow deeper down the core of it, there's some kind of joy that I get from making something. And from having it be complicated or mysterious or, I think I will always be chasing some experience that I had sitting in the audience when I was 18 watching Temptation of St. Anthony. That's it. That little fire is still alive, and I'm still striving for that in some way.
So what do you want to leave behind for the next generation of theater makers in the way that piece is etched in you? What do you think of your work etching?
Well, I think even the more serious things that we do, we still can't help but try to find some kind of ecstatic joy in them. Something, and I guess, we haven't talked a lot about the issue of liveness, but it's always been a concern of ours. How we used to like to stage things that we wanted the audience to think was something going wrong on stage.
Right.
I think that what I inherited somehow or another was a real belief in theater, a belief that this kind of live performance, whatever it was, back then I thought it was only the weird stuff that mattered. Now it's really all of it. But something that if we can make a contribution to an idea that there still needs to be live performance, that there is no replacement for it, that it brings a kind of joy and excitement and connection that nothing else can. So whatever we can do to keep that ideal alive, to keep the form alive, that's what I want.
Great. And would you share a favorite moment or moment of pure joy? You've talked about joy several times in this. What was a moment of pure joy in your making?
Well, oh gosh. I think of two things. There are many examples of, there have to be, otherwise I wouldn't still be doing it, of real joy. I think of part of the process of making The Sound and the Fury. We were working on that at New York Theater Workshop in 2008. And it was a moment when we had struggled to figure out a way of delivering this text on stage. And it had been so complicated and so daunting. And there was a moment where it was all kind of clicking and I was arranging elements and everything seemed to be firing and we were getting close. And it was that moment of sort of passing from the drudgery of organizing how to stage these different things to suddenly feeling it all clicking. It was feeling it lifting away from me and becoming its own thing. There was a moment upstairs in the third floor at New York Theater Workshop where I was like, this is why I'm doing this. So exciting. We were overlapping a bunch of different parts. I felt like we were just, the piece was finally just singing and doing a version of what Faulkner was doing. And then another time was the first time I watched Gats all the way through. And I was stood for the whole thing. It was like in a little cramped booth at the Performing Garage. And I remember somebody saw me walking up the stairs afterwards and said, "Wow, you look like you just had a baby." I was like, yeah, I kind of did. But it was like just real, a great sense of accomplishment, I guess, watching Scott deliver those. And not just mine, and I don't mean my accomplishment of all of our accomplishment.
Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this, John.
Yeah, you bet.
Really appreciate it.
It's great to have a chance to talk about all this.
Yeah. Thanks to HowlRound for hosting us, and we hope you'll tune into more Torches.